So today, I'm really excited because, I say that every time, but this really is a pretty special piece of content because this is something that is so incredibly current for me personally, and that's all about discovering our voice. So as always, if you've ever watched with me before, I'd love to have you guys just be really interactive within the comments. I see Katie's here from Chicago. Shirley's here, as always, from Minneapolis. So happy to have you here. Raju, thanks for joining us. And Vonda, thank you so much for joining us from Northern Carolina. So, like I said, today we are going to talk about cultivating that really true voice from within. And this is something that I personally have had quite a challenge with. And I'm curious, for those of you that are watching, just pop the word me into the chat if you found yourself at times having a little bit of a challenge with your voice. So this could be anything from actual physical challenges like difficulty speaking or choking and things like that, to also the challenge of just not necessarily appreciating your voice or having a challenge with your voice. Maybe you're kind of one of those people that just don't enjoy the way that your voice sounds. Maybe you get a little upset with certain things that you say sometimes, because that's part of our voice too. It's not just the sound of our voice, it's also the content and the context of the voice that I picture as our overall voice. And we're going to talk more about that. So just pop into the chat, just say me if you've ever had any challenges with your voice personally. Silver Shadow says, I'm so excited. Awesome. Vonda, perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Something like just speaking very quietly or not feeling like you want to be too loud or express yourself too much. So that's really what we're going to be focusing on. So what I'm really discovering within my own journey within the voice, and also I'm having lots and lots of conversations as I share my own experience. People are coming out of the woodwork left and right, and I'm finding that more and more people are sharing with me that they have had problems with their voice. And Shirley says yes. Katie says, struggled with a speech impediment as a kid. Wow, that's huge. Dana Miller says, I tend to talk to myself out loud. Okay, that is an aspect of the voice. That's awesome. So yeah, as you're popping into the chat, again, like people are showing up in droves saying, yeah, I've had issues with my voice in the past too. Or maybe they currently are having issues. And the voice is just so much more than just the sound that comes out. It's really like it's a resonation of what is inside of us. And it's a messenger too, because I think one of the things that sometimes we overlook is maybe we are having a challenge with the voice and we just kind of dismiss it as like, oh, I've just got a frog in my throat, or I'm just congested, or we excuse it on a lot of different things, but rarely do we look much further past that and start to see what is really at the root cause. So tonight, what I hope to share with you, I want to share a little bit about my own personal story and my own personal journey with the voice to help to create some context around it. But I also want to share with you some of the things that I'm finding out, again, through my own process, through my own journey, but also with the discussions that I'm having with people who are reaching out and saying, yeah, I'm having these challenges too. And I want to give you some things that hopefully will help you if you are having challenges with your voice to discover maybe what's kind of underneath this and what are some of the things that we can do to not just speak more authentically, but also speak in a healthy way, because that's part of my journey too. Shirley says, super stressed, I'll lose my voice. Yes. And I'll be able to create some context around why is that actually happening for you, Shirley. Vonda says, I do too. Some people think I'm talking to my dog, which I do, but I talk to myself out loud. And it's interesting because one of the things that we can talk about tonight too is just some people are internal processors and some people are external processors. And external processors, that is kind of part of the voice, is processing thoughts out loud. So that might help to offer a little bit of context of that experience too. So I have been speaking for a living for over 20 years now. And what I mean by that is even as a hairdresser, we speak for a living. But really early on within my career, I had the opportunity to start to teach, to be able to stand in front of an audience, whether that's in a classroom or on a stage or on video. But for the last 20 years, that's been my job, is to speak, is to talk, is to verbalize. No one ever in all of the classes that I took on how to teach, how to speak for a living, no one ever taught me, well, here's how you do it in a healthy way. And so for those 20 years, I wasn't necessarily doing things in a very healthy way. I wasn't taking good care of my voice. So one of the first things that I started to notice is that, like, especially on days where I had to speak a lot, or classes that, I was 2 or 3 day classes where I had to really push my voice hard, I would lose my voice and it would feel very strained. And for those of you that are just working in a salon full time, how many of you sometimes come home from the salon and like, whew, my voice is really stressed? Pop into the chat if you have experienced that sometimes you can tell that your voice is getting really strained just from talking in the salon all day. So challenges didn't really become frequent until I took a position with Samvia at one point that probably wasn't the right position for me. And I feel totally comfortable sharing this because as a group, we know what really happened, which was I asked for a position. I said, hey, I really want to take on this position that was a little bit more of an office job. It was a little bit more of like, I don't want to call it a corporate job, but it was, it was meetings, and it was, very specific 9 to 5 schedules and things like that weren't necessarily my style. They weren't the things that I had been doing most of my life. I had been a hairdresser. I had been a teacher. I hadn't really been someone that had to sit through lots of different meetings throughout a day, be in front of my computer quite a bit. And so what started to happen, I noticed that especially in meetings, I was starting to have a really hard time speaking at times. It would almost feel like I would kind of get choked. My throat would start to close up, and I wouldn't be able to share what I wanted to share. And when I started to feel that resistance, I would push harder. I would speak louder. I would try to have my voice be heard. And I noticed that what was coming up for me in my experience and in my stories in my head is I wasn't being heard, or I didn't feel like my voice was important, things like that. And that's not to say that anyone in the team was actually treating me in that way. That was my perception. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I wasn't necessarily in a meeting where I personally felt like I should be. And so a lot of times I didn't necessarily feel like I was being heard. So I would feel like I had to force my voice more. Shirley says, oh yeah, my ears felt the same strain after a day in the salon. Yeah. Yeah, good. And Vonda said, I'd not talk for a couple hours, and people would sometimes, it sounds like people knew that you needed to decompress. That's great. Thank you, Raju. I appreciate that. So at a certain point, I realized that this particular job that I had asked for and they had graciously given me wasn't working. And it was actually starting to deteriorate my health because I just wasn't in the right place. And again, I want to make sure I'm clear that it wasn't that Samvia as a company wasn't doing a great job and that everyone on the team wasn't awesome people. It's I was personally in the wrong place. And so the beautiful thing was I was able to have a conversation with the other leaders, and they allowed me to step back into my position of just being an education director and a teacher and a facilitator. And what I noticed is when I first stepped back into teaching, my voice was better. But what I really started to notice is even when I was teaching hair, I started to notice the voice getting tighter, voice getting harder. When I would talk about things like tonight, we had, we started to do at first we called it cabin fever, and we did it on Fridays. It was right when the shutdowns first happened around COVID. On cabin fever days, where I was discussing wellness, health, mindset, things that I was really passionate about, my voice seemed to be more open. On days that I was teaching hair, my voice was getting more closed. And it's no secret to those of you that have watched this before, watched Wellness Wednesday with me before, I was starting to lose my passion for hair at a certain point. And that was really hard to digest because hair was everything that I knew for 20 plus years. That was my passion for such a long time. So I'm in this place that I'm starting to lose my passion for the thing that's carried me through my entire career. I can tell that my voice is being stressed because of that, and yet I don't really know what to do. But I'm starting to have the experience that when I'm talking more about coaching, my voice is becoming more open. So awesome, Vaughn. I'm glad you like Wellness Wednesday. That's awesome. Yeah, Shirley, exactly. I explored the position and it didn't work. And for those of you that are watching, if you see my eyes go down here and I'm kind of talking, I'm just looking at the comments that come up. They come up over here on the right-hand side of the screen. So if you have anything to offer, please feel free to pop into the chat. I love to have conversation. So this is what really brought me to the point at the beginning of 2021, at the end of 2020, that I had to sit down and have the tough conversation with Sam that my passion had left for hair. And I thought it was time for me to step away from my position as education director for Sam Via and to focus on my own coaching business. And I have to say, it was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. The team was so incredibly supportive and continues to be so incredibly supportive of that decision. But I could tell within even the first few weeks of the decision, once I started to focus on my own journey, that it was the right decision because my voice started to open up again. That strain started to lessen. But the damage had already been done in many ways. And still to this day, I still have issues with my voice sometimes. So hopefully that story sheds some context on why this is such an important conversation, why it's become such a passionate place for me to speak from, is just around this aspect of voice and how essential it is. Yeah, exactly, Shirley. The big feeling. Yes, definitely some beautiful relief. So here are some of the things that I've really discovered through my own experience and through having these conversations with many other people. First and foremost is that we as human beings have a need to feel heard. We have a need to feel seen. We have a need to feel understood. And if that need is not fulfilled, problems arise. The problems can arise in many, many different ways. And I think for many of us who I've talked to, the place that it tends to arise very often is issues in voice. Because almost every single person that I've spoken to that has had some issue with their voice, there is some connection to not feeling seen, not feeling heard, not feeling understood. And so that has been a really common thread. And I think that for all of us, that is a basic human need. We fulfill it in a very different ways. Some of us want to have big platforms to stand up on and speak and teach. Others of us, it's just, I need a best friend. And that's where I feel seen and heard and understood. But if that need is unfulfilled, like any basic human need that goes unfulfilled, something will happen. Some compensation will arise. Some challenge will arise. And for me, part of that was what became my throat challenges. Vonda says not being understood is very hurtful. And absolutely, it's really challenging to feel like we are not understood, that we are not heard. Absolutely. Joanne Bosnos, I'm sorry if I didn't say your last name correctly, says, I love that you're talking about this. Voice and speaking is not often talked about. Yes, yes, yes. Kay, thank you for joining us. You're not late. You're right on time. And you can always come back and rewatch the beginning part. No problem. Glad you're here. Yeah, Joanne, this is I'm going to bring your comment up on screen because I'm glad that you said this too. This is something that I'm recognizing as I'm having these conversations with people, is this is just not talked about very often. And I can't tell you how many presentation skills classes I've been to in my life, and just the voice itself, the quality of the voice, where the voice comes from, how to take care of it. This is something that is not talked about very often. So thank you for recognizing that. Yes, Shirley, absolutely. She says, even when you don't need to be the center of attention, you do want to be heard when you do say something. Absolutely, 100%. And wanting to be heard is not dysfunctional. There are times that it turns into something dysfunctional because the need isn't being met in a healthy way. And so we need to make sure that that's taken care of within us. And there's healthy ways to do that. The other thing that has come up really often, and it was something for me through the story that you just heard, and it's something that's a common thing that I'm hearing in other people's stories, is speaking inauthentically or speaking from a place that doesn't have truth or passion behind it. We're very often committed to something, whether that's what we think we should be or how we think we should be speaking or what subjects we should be speaking on. If we are committed to those things, it keeps us in a place of inauthenticity. And at first, one of the things that, if any of you have seen any of my social posts lately, I posted about this just recently, but my friend Sean Float had said something. He works with the physical body very much, and the energetic physical body. And one of the things he taught me is that the body can adapt. It's very good, actually, at adapting to what we put on it. At some point, it can no longer adapt, or it will no longer adapt. And that's when pain starts to arise, is when it can no longer adapt. And so if we keep putting ourselves in a place that's inauthentic, we keep putting ourselves in a place to speak about things that aren't true to us, the body can adapt. The voice will adapt, actually. My voice actually even sounded different. If you go back and watch some of the Samvia videos towards the end of when I was working there, you will notice that my voice sounds different. Because at that point, as much as I loved to teach and I loved to share with you all out there, the subject of hair just wasn't my passion anymore. And you can hear it in my voice. It was different. And especially in comparison to what it is now. But that adaptation eventually turned painful. And that was the point that I had to start to change things. I had to start to speak from truth. And it's something that I'm hearing from a lot of people, that part of the challenge within their voice is arising from speaking about things that aren't true. And especially with how we treat our voice, how we treat the element of our voice, the larynx, as we speak. This is a very delicate mechanism. Have any of you ever played a kazoo? Type into the chat yes if you've ever played a kazoo. So if you've ever played a kazoo, that sound is these two little pieces that are vibrating against each other. And you go, so you add some sound and it goes, and it makes that little vibrating sound, right? So those two flaps, Wendy's like, yes, I've played a kazoo. Those two little flaps are really similar to what's actually inside of our larynx. And they're very delicate little structures that are controlled by a ton of tiny little muscles. And so if we, Shirley says, I wouldn't call it playing, making sound with one. Yeah. But that structure is very delicate. And so if we continually stress it and we don't do it in a healthy way, over time, we're going to have issues. And I know that a lot of the people that are watching are hairdressers here. And so even for those of us that are hairdressers, we basically kind of keep straining the voice, especially if we work in a loud salon. We keep putting the body and the vocal cords through that stress. Something eventually is probably going to have to give. So taking good care of our voice is really essential too. And the big piece that was a huge, and if you've watched my Wellness Wednesdays, you know I'm a total nerd for how the autonomic nervous system affects our well-being and it affects our life. Well, yes, Wendy, exactly. It's like our whole body. If we keep putting it under stress, at some point it's going to break. So that's what happens within the vocal cords too. So here's something very interesting about how the nervous system affects the voice. We have the parasympathetic side, which is the more downregulation and calming side. And then we have the sympathetic side, which is the upregulation, the kind of fight or flight side is what we often label it. So if I start to have a conversation, the conversation becomes stressful because maybe I don't think I'm speaking very well. Maybe I start to get into my head about what I should or should not be saying. All of these different things, whatever it might be, whatever fears or insecurities start to come up, my nervous system starts to go up first. It goes into that sympathetic state. It takes us out of that nice, peaceful, coherent, balanced state. In polyvagal theory, they call it ventral vagal. But it's that state where we feel, pretty peaceful, pretty calm. We feel connected. We feel safe. As soon as I stop feeling safe, I'm going to go into the sympathetic side of the nervous system, which is the fight or flight side. Once we go into sympathetic, certain things happen. Our breath gets tighter and shorter and faster. So breath is voice, right? So if my breath becomes fast, if my breath becomes tight, all of a sudden, that's going to affect how I speak. The actual vocal cords themselves, the entire larynx actually gets tighter and it lifts. And so you'll notice as you get really excited, the voice becomes higher and higher. And it's because the larynx, the voice, and the thing that shapes the voice, the distance in the rest of the voice, the vocal area, gets shorter and tighter. And so we start to ramp up. And at some point, if we get to a certain point where that sympathetic fight or flight gets overwhelming, we shut down. We go into a state that polyvagal theory calls dorsal vagal. We're no longer in sympathetic. We're no longer in fight or flight. We're in shutdown. And that's where I noticed that I was getting to, because what was happening is I would get so stressed and I would get so anxious about the fact that my voice wasn't working. Now I'm overthinking, are people thinking that I sound terrible? I'm overthinking all these things. I got my nervous system so ramped up that it went into shutdown. That's where we stop being able to choose words. We can't even speak. We almost feel like we can't think straight. That's that dorsal vagal shutdown. So the reason this is important is because if you can recognize where you're at, that's where you can move from. If we are in shutdown, we have to do something to get ourselves back up. We have to up-regulate our system. We have to activate ourselves. If we're in that highly sympathetic state where we're still up here in fight or flight, we haven't reached the tipping point of where we go into shutdown yet. The good news is, if we can use some of that energy that we have up here in fight or flight and start to work with that energy, we can get ourselves back to a place of calming down. It's really hard to calm down once we're at that really heightened state. So we want to do something with the energy. So don't fight the energy, do something with it. Then we can start to release and calm back down. So this all affects our ability to speak our truth. It physically affects our ability to make sound with our vocal cords, especially make sound that we want to even hear come out of our own mouth. And so the nervous system is such a key aspect. And if that nervous system is all over the place, and we can't regulate it, it's really hard to speak from an authentic and true place. I want to check in with some of your comments, because I've seen some comments come in. Ooh, that's a great question. Dana's asking, how can we use our voice to help those clients that sit in our chair that always seem to have that Debbie Downer energy? I love this question. And I've actually had this question before. So one of the things that's very simple is to make sure that we keep our energy in a good place. Because naturally, what tends to happen is as we're in relationship with someone, in conversation with someone, that their energy is low, the natural thing is for us to want to mirror because we want to be respectful. And that's a way that we create connection with people is we mirror. And there's actually things called mirror neurons that want to be in that mirroring state. So our natural thing is to go where they're at. It's not disrespectful to not go there with them. We can recognize for them that, wow, it seems like that's really hard. I'm really sorry to hear that you're going through that. That's fine. That's called empathy, is being able to show them that we understand why they might be in that place without us necessarily having to go there with them. Because that sympathy is going there with them, and that's not necessarily always helpful. So if we can keep our energy in a good place, there is a resonance from the heart, and this is science. This isn't woo-woo fairy dust stuff. There is a resonance from our heart, the intelligence of the heart, that can literally be measured 6 feet from our body. And so if the presence that we carry can be measured 6 feet from our body, then that leads us to believe that we can actually connect with other people just through our energy. And here's how you know this is true. I know that every single one of you have had the experience that you're at a party or at a social get-together of some sort. One person can walk through the door and you don't even know they walk through the door, but you can almost feel their presence, this uplifting, awesome, energetic presence. A different person can walk through the door and have the complete opposite effect, which is as they walk through the door, the whole vibe of the party, the whole energy goes. So we know that we can affect people just with our energy. So that's first, is with our energy. If we keep our energetic presence up, that can really help to support that person. As far as our voice, it's what we say and how we share that presence within us. That's our voice. And so recognizing that everything from the tonality of our voice, the pace of our voice, the emotion behind our voice is being heard. The human ear can sense like microscopic changes in pressure. And that's what our voice is it's sound waves, it's pressure. And so just the sound of someone's voice can be so soothing. It can bring our soul into a very different place. So being conscious that the way that we speak to them can actually affect how they feel. And of course, the word choice. So if my word choice follows the progression of, hey, you're kind of Debbie Downer, that's supporting it. If my word choice instead is, I know that sometimes these kind of things seem kind of cheesy or hard, but actually asking, like, what's the best thing that's happened to you this week? What are you grateful for that's happened this week? That's using our voice to help support a change in direction in viewpoint. So hopefully that helps. Those are a couple tips. Those are some of the things that I definitely found as far as my own relationships with my coaching clients, with my clients in the chair, helped quite a bit. Vonda says panic attacks killed the career for 10 years. Fight or flight is awful. Yeah, and you chose to flight. I'm kind of a flight person too. When I go into that state, I just want to take off. I want to get away from this situation. So sounds like hopefully you've been able to work with that. Yes, Wendy, you do lose your breath if once that tension gets high. Yeah, and surely this coherence goes out the window. Absolutely. I see, Vonda. You said I rarely have them now, but they were a total body shutdown. Yeah, so it sounds like you actually tipped past that sense of the sympathetic, the up. You were actually going into what they call dorsal vagal. Awesome. Dana says that's when you find that you lose your voice. So this is one of the things that when we find ourselves in connection with someone that there's not congruence with, that can really start to create stories and start to create this sort of direction within the mind that takes us into that sympathetic tone, that takes us into that fight or flight. So part of it is trying to make sure that we keep our presence, that we preserve our presence so that it's not that Debbie Downer personality, or maybe it's the person that just wants to, blame everyone for everything, or they're very judgmental. It's easy to get pulled into that energy and kind of lose ourselves. And I believe that that's where we do find that we start to lose voice. So maybe check in with that. Let me know what you find out after kind of hearing this. And as you work with your clients, notice if that has any truth for you. Awesome, David. I'm glad you joined us. Awesome. So here is a couple things that I would suggest if you do find yourself wanting to do some work with your voice and to help support your voice. Here's a couple things that I would suggest. First and foremost, we have to start doing the inner work. Because, like I said, some of the things that have been pretty universal in the people I've talked to that have been having challenges with their voice is that it comes down to some very specific things. Not feeling heard, not feeling understood, not feeling seen. Also, stepping away from our authenticity puts us in a place that the voice has to adapt, and it creates strain. That seems to me like a very common pattern of compensation within people that are having challenges with their voice. So if we want to step back to our authenticity, we have to understand what that means. We really have to understand, what are these things that are affecting how I perceive myself? What are these things that are affecting my ability to feel heard, to feel understood? And that's the inner work. And of course, a lot of times that needs support from a coach, from a therapist, from a good friend, whoever it might be. But we have to start to look at what keeps me feeling this certain way that is creating that disconnection. What do I want to move towards that is more true? What is more authentic to me? I know that some of you probably joined me for Wellness Wednesday quite a few weeks ago, probably a few months ago at this point, where I showed you the core values exercise, which is just a way to look at, what do you value? In fact, pop into the chat. Put one or two things into the chat. What do you value most? Like for me, my core values are love, wisdom, and peace. Sometimes peace and joy. Depends on what day I'm on. But especially love and wisdom, that's where I want to operate from. So now I have those two things that I know are at my deepest core. And I can look at, well, is what I'm expressing, is what I'm talking about, is what I'm sharing in the world in alignment with love? Is it in alignment with wisdom? Is it in alignment with peace or joy? And if it's not, then it's not in alignment with me. And I've got no business talking in that way or speaking in that way. And by the way, typing, that's our voice still. A lot of times we disconnect from recognizing that what we are saying in a typed out message, whether that's on social media or on a text message or within an email, that's still our voice. We're still expressing our voice. We're not saying it out loud, but it's still expressing our voice. So we need to check in with ourselves. Is what I'm typing in on my social media post, or as a reply to a social media post, or as a text message, is that in alignment with my truth, with my core values? Kay is saying, love for all and myself, family, making a difference. Awesome, Kay. So that's something you can check in with, is what I'm sharing, is how I'm speaking to the world. Is that in alignment with those things? Shirley says, authenticity, grace, And the third one skips around a bit. Awesome. So for Shirley, you get to check in with is how I'm communicating, how I'm sharing my voice in alignment with authenticity and grace. David says core value is kindness. I love that. Yes. So David, you get the opportunity to check in all the time with is how I'm expressing myself to the world based in kindness, which I think it is. Yeah. She cut Miss Gypsy says being an artist and my local support. Beautiful. So you get to check in with that as you communicate. Yes. Wendy says, call them. Stop texting. Absolutely. Yes. Awesome, Vonda. Kindness, always your best quality. So you get to check in and make sure that you're speaking from that. And I would be willing to bet if you ever feel that strain, if you ever feel that tightness come on, if you really check in with, is this coming from that place of values? Is that coming from my truth? There might be some opportunities to go, ooh, actually, you know what? In that moment, or my relationship with that person, that when I do communicate with them, I notice my voice gets tight. I'm not coming from those core values. I'm not coming from my truth. So really understanding what is at the core of our truth, I think is such an essential part of speaking from a place that the voice has truth to it. And even the sound of it. I know that if I am coming from a place that feels really authentic, like having this conversation with you right now, this is my true voice. This is what it sounds like. The days that I'm speaking about something that I don't feel committed to, I don't feel as my truth, it doesn't even sound like me. And so I'm very aware of it now. David says, we never know what the next person is experiencing that day. Being kind can easily make a person smile. Oh my gosh, yes, 100%. And Vonda says, accept people for who they are and don't judge them. Absolutely. Which is easier said than done sometimes. But yes, that's what I strive for myself too. The other part is I would highly encourage you, if you find that you are having challenges with your with your voice, is to look at your breath. And breath work is multifaceted. There's lots of breath work out there that has a specific purpose. It's more of a tool. There is also breath work like Oxygen Advantage, which I'm a teacher for, that's really about teaching us how to breathe in a very functional and supportive way throughout our day. Not just techniques and practices to help manage the nervous system or to manage the breath, but also teaching us how to actually breathe on a daily basis that's in a way that's supportive. Because again, the voice is breath. And so if the breath is dysfunctional, it's going to be very hard to have an authentic voice that we can speak from. And if you do have to speak for a living, who out there just put a me in the chat if you are someone that has to speak for a living, whether it's you're a teacher, you're an educator, if you're a hairdresser, you speak for a living because you have to have conversations. So if you speak for a living, just type a yes or a me in the chat so I can see that. Nice. Dana says me. Shirley. Good. Wendy. So if you are someone that has to use your voice on a daily basis, especially Charlene says me, awesome. Jamie says yes. So if you are someone that uses your voice for your profession, I would highly recommend looking into voice lessons, because very often we only think of voice lessons as I'm a singer and I need to learn to, sing. But I've actually taken some online voice lessons from Roger Love, who's like a celebrity voice lesson guy, and you can find his stuff online. It's really, it's very affordable to just have his basic voice lessons. So you can go to just look up Roger Love, Love, and he has online voice lessons. And it's just simple practices that you can do each day of vocal warm-ups before you start to speak. Because I don't know if you go to the gym or not, but how many of you would actually go to the gym and just like lift the heaviest weight you possibly could without doing some type of warm-up? It's the same thing with our voice. So getting some voice lessons to learn how to take better care of our voice is hugely, hugely beneficial. There's a question from Brenda. Yes, Andrew, how would we slow down our voice if we are with a client and that client has a voice that is tighter, or even a student? Good question. So one of the things about pace, there's a natural pace. Some of us are much faster paced naturally, and we just speak quicker naturally. Those are people that have high D and high I type of communication styles, and especially people that are external external processors, meaning we talk to process a thought, tend to speak a little bit faster. So there is that natural pacing. And then there's some of us, like me, that just have a natural slower pace. So number one, Kay, I would just say that for you have to find what's natural for you so that you can practice staying in that place, even when someone else has a faster pace or they have a different energy than we do. Because again, that's what happens very often, is we have this natural inclination to mirror the other person. So if the other person's kind of fast and snappy, we might kind of feel that pressure, that anxiousness to keep up and to pursue that with them. So whether it's a client or a student that they're faster, they're whatever it might be, if we understand our own natural place and our own natural pace and our own natural style, we can preserve that. We can stay present in that. So that's what I would share with you. Wendy says singing every day. Awesome. I love that. Oh, sweet. Kay says I took voice lessons for 2 years back in the day, and it helps with public speaking. I love that. Yes, Dana, I love what you just said here, because I think that's really key. Even if you're not a professional speaker, even if you don't have to be in front of people, I'm so with you. I want my voice to be inspiring to the people that I come in contact with throughout the day. I want it to be something that brings something to them. And so I'm so with you. And I think that in and of itself, why wouldn't we want to take care of our voice? Why wouldn't we want to have a healthy voice? Beautiful. Love it. Sweet. So I hope that something about today just shared perspective or shared something with you that you can take home. If there's something that you were surprised by, or something that really spoke to you, please pop it into the chat. Charlene, I love this that you mentioned this. Hyper energetic small persons who stopped drinking coffee because of it. Good tip, by the way. Caffeine does actually tend to create some tightness in the vocal cords. So especially if we do have to speak a lot, or we're going to actually speak that day, be careful with the caffeine consumption. Plus, it's a natural diuretic, which takes the water out of the body. But also, caffeine itself doesn't necessarily put us into a stress state. It does tend to jack up the energy. So if our energy is high, we are much more susceptible to those higher stress states. So sometimes caffeine, that energy high, is like, ooh, great, if we have something to do with it. But if we put ourselves into a stressful state, we're also much more susceptible to that stress state. So thank you for sharing that too. No, you can still have caffeine, Shirley, and just, monitor how much. So thank you all so much for being a part of this conversation. As you can tell, this is something that's really super important to me. And I really do appreciate all your comments, all your interaction. So if you did miss anything tonight, please know that you can always come back and rewatch anything that you missed during this episode. And I do want to also just a huge thanks to my Samvia family for being part of this entire journey, because, as I said, a lot of this came from decisions that I made during my time with Samvia, and they had to have a lot of patience with me to walk this journey with me. So thank you to my Samvia family for being patient and understanding. And thank you for continuing to be a huge supporter of mine as I stepped out on my own journey, like giving me this platform to be able to still speak to our community.